On 23 July 2024, Mrs. Debbie Olakunbi, a popular caterer in Ondo State, Nigeria, celebrated her 54th birthday. She was bubbling with joy and excitement, and she made this known by sharing pictures of her big day on her social media page. In a few moments from now, you'll get to understand why she deserved to celebrate and feel every single joy and happiness she felt that very day. Debbie's birthday party was a big one, and since she was popular among politicians, her party was graced by the presence of some influential and wealthy people in the state. These people showered her with money as she danced with joy and excitement. However, what Mrs. Debbie didn't know was that out of the numerous guests present at her party that day, 3 people who were very close to her had already sealed her fate, as she would soon suffer a tragic death in a manner that would make even the most experienced police officers break down in tears. After her birthday party that day, Mrs. Debbie returned to her 2-bedroom apartment where she lived alone, but in a compound with 3 other male tenants living in their own individual flats. 2 of the male tenants had traveled, leaving just one of them together with Mrs. Debbie in the compound. 2 days after the birthday party, the only male tenant left in the compound returned home to find a key dangling outside the door to Mrs. Debbie's apartment. He just brushed it off, thinking she was home. However, things got terrifying as each day went by. He began noticing Mrs. Debbie's absence from the compound, but he didn't make anything of it, since the key to her apartment was still dangling outside. 4 days after the birthday party, the male tenant began perceiving a foul odor in the compound, but still, he didn't make a big deal out of it. On Sunday, 28 July 2024, 5 days after Mrs. Debbie's birthday party, the laundryman who had been assisting her in washing her clothes came around. He called and knocked, but there was no response from Mrs. Debbie. The male tenant, who was still around at the time, told him to go inside the house since the door was still unlocked. The laundryman went inside, but nothing in the world would have ever prepared him for the scene he witnessed that very day. When he got into the bedroom, he found out that Mrs. Debbie had been butchered and her remains were already decomposing, hence the foul smell that was perceived in the compound. This horrific discovery was reported to the police, who then showed up with an ambulance. The family of the deceased were informed about the tragic incident, and some of them began making their way to the scene. The police examined the apartment and found out that there was no evidence of violence in the living room or her bedroom, as both places were not roughened up. They also noticed that her gold jewelries and other valuables were still intact. Also, the compound where she lived was fenced, and the top of the fence surrounded with broken bottles, which would have made it very difficult for anyone to scale into the compound without getting badly injured. Upon further search, they found the cutlass that was used in the attack. Due to the manner in which Mrs. Debbie was murdered, there were lots of questions as to the reason behind such a brutal attack. Debbie's brother revealed that her sister was in a relationship with a popular traditional title holder in Akure, the capital city of Ondo State. It was also revealed that Debbie used to lend money to the said man, which later resulted in a scuffle between them, as the man did not want to pay back the money he borrowed from her. It was also reported that the late Debbie had previously accused the traditional title holder of maltreatment, but it was not known if she eventually left the relationship. Some people believe that her death may have been political, since she was a member of a popular political party in Ondo State. Others said it would have been as a result of the competition among caterers in the state. However, these 2 insinuations were debunked, as Mrs. Debbie did not hold any post in the political party she belonged to. Also, the catering business is deemed wide enough for each practitioner to have their own clients. Some people suggested that the searchlight should be beamed on the staff of Debbie's company, while others said her death could have been orchestrated by the people she offended or by the wives of some of the men she dated. Everyone was confused and the speculations were just running wild. However, things took a different turn when the police introduced technology into the picture. Mrs. Debbie Olakunbi had been divorced for over 18 years. She had 2 children with her ex-husband. Debbie used to work as a banker and later as a secretary in Lagos State. Things weren't going well for her, so she decided to relocate from Lagos to Ondo State, where she established a small catering business. However, what started as a small business metamorphosed into a full-fledged catering services company called Country Kitchen. This became one of her major breakthroughs in life, as she got to know a lot of valuable people, including government officials, politicians, and other prominent members of the society, through her business. During their preliminary investigations, the police discovered that 2 of Mrs. Debbie's Android phones were missing, and so was her ATM card. The neighbors in the compound were brought in for questioning. It was later ascertained that they had nothing to do with the heinous crime. Mrs. Debbie's staff were also brought in for questioning. His 17-year-old personal assistant, Philip Emmanuel, who had been working with her for 5 months, was interrogated, but he denied knowing anything about the death of his boss. He was released and allowed to go home. Mrs. Debbie's driver, who was employed just 2 weeks before her death, was also invited for questioning, but he refused to show up. The police called him the second time, but he still didn't show up. It was at this point that the police became suspicious of him. Mrs. Debbie's 2 Android phones were traced to 2 different locations in Ondo State, one of which was Akure, the town where the driver, identified as a 16-year-old secondary school student, Precious Kolawole, was determined to be staying. The police tracked the driver's phone, where they found out that Philip was still in contact with him. The police then invited Philip for questioning the second time. When faced with the fact that he was still in contact with the driver, he began shaking, after which he started singing like a bird. Philip confessed to taking part in the murder of his boss, Mrs. Debbie Olakunbi. He went on to give the details on what led to the heinous act. It turned out that a few days back, Mrs. Debbie's personal driver, Precious, had overheard her discussing a major business deal to which she was supposed to receive a huge sum of money into her bank account in the coming days. This information awoke some darkness in Precious, who then began making plans to steal the expected sum of money to begin his internet fraud business. Some days later, he approached Philip to inform him that 150,000 naira just entered their madam's account, that they should murder her and steal the money. Philip told him that he hadn't taken a life before. However, 2 days after the birthday party, Mrs. Debbie was said to have invited her domestic workers, her personal assistant and cook, Philip Emmanuel, her personal driver, Precious Kolawole, and one other person to her apartment, where she cooked and served them food in appreciation of their efforts in ensuring that her birthday party was a success. Little did she know that this kind gesture was about to become her very last mistake on earth. When they all arrived in the apartment, Mrs. Debbie served them food as she had planned and also thanked them for their good work. There was no power supply at the time, so the generator was turned on to power the house. After serving them food, Mrs. Debbie told them she was tired and then returned to her bedroom to get some sleep. It was at this point that Precious approached Philip once again with his wicked idea. Precious had come fully prepared for the act. He gave Philip an unknown substance to drink before handing him a cutlass to go and carry out the act. Philip was reluctant about doing what he requested, so Precious threatened to use the weapon on him if he didn't do as he asked. The three then went into Mrs. Debbie's bedroom, where they brutally attacked her with the weapon until she tragically passed away. After committing the evil act, Precious then stole her 2 Android phones and ATM card. He tried to cover up the crime as a fire accident by turning on the cooking gas and hoping it would explode. Unluckily for him, the explosion didn't happen as he had planned. The three then exited the building and went into hiding. Precious met his biggest disappointment when he found out that the bank account attached to the ATM card he stole only had 60,000 naira in it. He withdrew the whole amount and then sent half of it to Philip. After this confession, Philip was detained in the police station and the other accomplice was also arrested. However, Precious remained on the run for over a month before he was finally arrested on the 18th of September 2024. Precious confessed to being the mastermind behind the gruesome attack. He also confessed to providing the weapons used in carrying out the attack. Philip was charged with 3 counts of conspiracy, murder, and theft. He was arraigned in court on the 5th of September 2024, while Precious is yet to appear in court as at the time of making this video. Mrs. Debbie was laid to rest in early September 2024. May her soul rest in peace. One important lesson to learn from this story is that you should never discuss any financial dealings in public or around people who are not supposed to be privy to such information. As we await to hear the kind of sentencing the judge will award to all suspects, don't forget to like, subscribe, and also turn on the notification button so that you will be promptly notified whenever I publish an update on this case. Thank you for watching and stay safe.